I am in Florida, Tallahassee.
Oh, nice. Yeah, nice and hot out there, isn't it?
I'm sure it's warmer than possibly where you are, but it's like 50 degrees this morning.
Oh wow. Well, I'm on the outskirts of London, so I grew up in London, but I'm currently based in Essex, which is just on the borders of London. I'm not sure if you're aware of the counties and the setup of the cities here. Yeah, so I mean, as you know, London is pretty grey. all we get is rain and grey skies, so it's nothing too exciting over here at all.
Yeah, well, I'm sending some sunshine. You see, I got my bright yellow on.
Oh,
so.
nice. Yeah, I woke up this morning. I didn't want to put my heater on just yet, so I'm still in my hoodie or sweatshirt, as you guys will call it. But anyway, welcome to LetsDoHumans podcast. Is it Professor LaTanya White, right?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. So, in terms of professor, what is it that you teach over there?
I actually teach at a historically Black college. There are over 100 in the States.
Yeah.
And I teach at one of the largest by student population, but recently ranked the #1 public HBCU because of our programs, our graduation rates, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So I teach entrepreneurship.
Amazing.
Thank you. So I do the air quotes because, entrepreneurship is something that you do, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that as well, actually, because me and my mentor have a very interesting conversation when it comes to entrepreneurship. He said there's two types of people. There's individuals who are kind of like born to do. Like you can put them in any environment and all of a sudden something always seems to happen for them, or they always seem to find a way. And then there's those that you might necessarily need to coach into it or like train them into finding out who their true self can potentially be and what their potentials and limits can reach. So there's individual. How do you find that scope in terms of identifying those individuals?
It's actually interesting. So as a part of my doctoral research, I've been looking at identity construction. I struggled with some of my students because they did not see themselves as entrepreneurs. So I really had to get into what helps someone to identify as an entrepreneur, and especially Black entrepreneurs, right? Because here in the States, we don't talk, we don't encourage entrepreneurship. Like at least, my grandmother and my mother didn't really have it like on the tip of their tongues to talk about entrepreneurship. So that's changing a little bit. But in the research that I've come across, there's a theory that there are two different types of paths to entrepreneurship. And one of them is opportunity or necessity.
Yeah.
So to your mentor's point, there's that one person that you put them wherever they are and they're going to find something to build. And then the necessity entrepreneurs on the other spectrum, maybe they're just frustrated with their job or they're out of work and they had to figure out a way to kind of make ends meet and things of that nature.
Yeah, most definitely. It's an interesting one because I've been looking at it in terms of like the Black community in general here in the UK. And I realized that being like second and first and third generation, our parents had a different type of struggle. So their focus wasn't necessarily trying to be entrepreneurs, even though if you look at historically, the diaspora that traveled from Africa to the UK, they were entrepreneurs to make that move. But when they come here, they kind of turn into like a survival mode state, and they tend to take whatever work they're able to take, whether that be because of their immigration status or their economical status. And so their focus and their teachings when passing down knowledge to us tend to be quite different, and it varies. So I think it's definitely up to the new generation to make that change happen. So it's a very interesting scope of looking at it. But can you give me a bit of background to yourself? What is it that you do, like overall?
Yeah, so the university that I teach at, Florida A&M University, I am a product of the same degree program where I teach. So I teach in the School of Business. and it it was the only college I applied to. Like, I would not recommend that to anyone.
Yeah.
But I was I'm still very much an introvert, but very sheltered and very shy. But a part of our degree program, we had to complete 3 internships. And I was in a master, so it was a 5-year program. So your first 3 years were undergraduate, and then your next 2 years were graduate level courses, but you had to complete a total of 3 internships to get the degree.
Okay, to get the degree,
Yeah. So my last internship, I was in specialized pharmaceutical sales, and I was in upstate New York. I was in like Albany to the Finger Lakes region. I'm not sure if your listeners are familiar with like that part of the States, but I was out there on my own. They gave me a computer, a car, an apartment, and a list of doctors. And I had to figure it out. I had to build the relationships. I had to, really speak their language. I had to become a healthcare provider because I was a part of that process. And I didn't know, and this was like back in 2000.
Yeah.
I was working on my master's. So I didn't know that was a form of entrepreneurship, like intra, I-N-T-R-A, entrepreneurship. And it was like this latent, like there was such a delay. There was like a 3 or 4 year delayed reaction. It's like, oh snap, that's pretty. I could do that.
Yeah, like I've done it.
Yeah. So I worked in pharmaceutical sales professionally for about 4 years before I started a bartending business. So I am a mixologist by training. Yeah.
What sort of stuff you whipping up?
Actually, I have a virtual cocktail party this afternoon to do.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
To do like some toasted hot chocolate for a client. Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty cool. That's pretty amazing. How's teaching been like during this whole pandemic for you? Or how is it like over there in the part of the States that you're in?
So I actually been teaching online since 2013.
Yeah, adaptation's been it's been quite straightforward adapting for you then.
Yeah, for me, right? But for my colleagues and for my students and other classes with teachers, professors who aren't as tech savvy, who, first of all, are flat in person, like they have no personality in person. It's really hard for the students to engage in the delivery of the information. It just, you have to be engaging, and sometimes you just get so caught up. And, I've been doing this for 20 years, so I know this off the top of my head, but there's this thing called the curse of knowledge, right? That we sometimes bring into the classroom, which is, I know this, and subconsciously, I'm expecting you to at least have a foundation so I can level you up. But I have to, there's sometimes you just have to remediate the student. Like, you have to get them to where you need them to be to start. And we take that for granted a lot of the times.
Most definitely. It's been a tricky period. I think there's individuals who've been able to adapt fantastically well. And obviously, like yourself, you were already online anyway, so the adaptation process has been fairly smooth. Like even me, for instance, with the podcasting and everything else that I do, it was usually face-to-face. It's usually at home on my couch, recording with people, networking with various individuals, whether in business, science, because a lot of my topics vary, and the groups that I kind of engage with vary across the board. And I prefer the human contact. It's just the type of person I am. I prefer being face-to-face. But when they hit, I quickly had to adapt because 1, my audience wanted the product, and 2, I had to find a way of delivering it. So I went online, and initially I didn't enjoy going online. But then I found another avenue happening, which is something I'm experiencing right now with you, is talking to people across the board. So I'm not just speaking to people within the UK or within London. Now I'm speaking to people across the world, and I'm building networks and friendships across the world. I feel like I've got connections everywhere now. So there's been a massive silver lining. I'm being invited to all sorts of things once everything kind of calms down. So sometimes there is that fear of the new, And that's something which entrepreneurs like really need to pick up on. And my mentor always mentions as well, is like the fear of the new. Don't be afraid of the new, because there's always like new opportunities that are appealing. People are like, oh no, I'm not sure about this, I'm not sure about that. So how do you navigate that in terms of like finding new opportunities in times of like unrest?
Yeah, that's a great question, and really, really great perspective to, be able to pull out the silver lining. There is a book, there are actually a couple of books that really have situated my perspective on being able to adapt and being responsive. The first one is Blue Ocean Strategy. Okay. And of course, I don't have a copy nearby.
Yeah. I'm gonna write that down. Every time I'm a bookworm, so every time I get recommended, I'm always getting pen and paper. I'll tell you the story behind it. Actually, what's the name of the book?
Blue Ocean Strategy.
Blue Ocean Strategy. Okay.
Yeah. And it's such a great book. It actually profiles a movie theater. I don't know the name of the movie theater, but it profiles a movie theater like chain in the UK. And so what this chain was doing, they were really kind of scrubbing the data and looking at who are our consumers and what are the characteristics of our consumers. And so they found that the majority of the consumers were married couples with kids. And so what Blue Ocean Strategy does, like this concept, and I read this book like 8 years ago, but I still like embed it into my teaching practice. But the concept says you don't just look at your competition, you look at your customers. Like, what is it that the customer still needs that the marketplace isn't providing for them? And in the case of these consumers, that you go into this decision-making factor, like, are they showing the movie that I want? What's the environment? Do I like the space? But for married couples with kids, they also have to consider, what do we do with the kids? So in this particular case study, the movie theater implemented like on-site babysitting services. Okay. Right? Yeah. So it's like, I don't even have to think about another movie theater or another chain, because they've solved all the problems.
Yeah. You don't need to look for a babysitter either.
Exactly. So that is the Blue Ocean Strategy, is finding that gap. And while it might seem like it's outside of the core of your services, if you really look at the fact that entrepreneurs serve customers and not just build products or provide services, then you are getting to the core of why you're in business, which is to solve problems for your consumer base.
Most definitely. Well, all major businesses, and as we can see as well, all major corporations have been problem solving. So Amazon, for instance, has taken over the world. And, and it's so strange. It's like they were so perfectly situated for this pandemic. It just made perfectly sense. It's almost as if they had hindsight. I mean, if you speak to some of the weird conspiracy theories, they will say they had to have involvement in it. But it's like their structure and their business just perfectly caters to people's needs now. We want things faster. We're more demanding. We pressure like companies to deliver on a quicker basis now. And now that everyone is sitting at home just ordering stuff online, hardly any stores are open. I've got endless amount of empty Amazon boxes here, stuff that I would have probably never ordered had it not been for the pandemic. So it's like they're perfectly situated for our current mindset and also our current behavioral patterns, which is something which is vitally important when you're looking at businesses and you're looking at hindsight. So now whenever I'm working on any new projects, whenever I'm speaking to anyone in regards to like podcasting and stuff like that, I don't just look at it for the conversation I'm having now. I'm looking at potential business opportunities later on down the line. Like, I don't know when we're next going to cross paths and what idea I might have or what idea you might have that might be reciprocal and might work for our benefit. So I always tell people one of the most important things is like networking and building friendships and holding on to those for whatever it may be for the future down the line. But what's the importance to you of having like a side hustle?
Oh,
Or would you
so
consider what like some of your businesses as a side hustle, or do you classify them solely? Because people, what I come across, and the reason why I ask this, anytime I speak to entrepreneurs, some people don't like the idea of the word side hustle because they think it kind of minimizes what is that they're doing, and then others just prefer to call them businesses. But I mean, I like the word side hustle because everyone tends to have a main thing that they go to, and then the rest on the side that kind of pumps it up, or you're waiting for one of them to really take you to where you need to go.
Yeah. And you probably are familiar with the phrase that, the wealthiest people in the world have at least 7 streams of revenue. So I'm not knocking it. Back in maybe 2004. Yeah, early when I first started my bartending business, so sometime around then, I was actually featured in Essence magazine because they used to have this monthly column called The Side Hustle of the Month.
Yeah.
And I had just started my bartending business, and I would devour that column. I was like, I'm going to be in this magazine. And I stalked the feature editor. And this was before all that we have with the internet and everything. But I pitched myself and I had an interview, and I was featured as the side hustle of the month with my bartending business.
Oh, amazing.
And so that bartending business really got me into my teaching position because I was bartending a housewarming party, and the client was really good friends with the interim dean of the business school.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and she was the dean. Now, remember, this is the same business school that I graduated from. Yeah. So she was a professor there when I was a student, and I had recently been featured in the local newspaper. And she was like, well, come in and let's talk. Let's talk about some opportunities for you to give back to the students, share your story and those kinds of things. So I was invited to be a guest lecturer in one of the entrepreneurship classes over the summer. And then that fall, I was in a teaching position, teaching entrepreneurship. Yeah. So the side hustle, right?
That's how it works. Yeah, most definitely. And that's why I always appreciate the side hustle. I think it's vitally important, especially the times that we live in. I mean, as you know, the system is not structured to give you a job that kind of caters to all your needs. Even some people basic survival needs. So you always need to have that additional. And I think that's why it's really important to teach people how to acquire that additional, or those who have it, how to properly harness it and develop it into something of extreme importance. So what's the key fundamentals when it comes to a side hustle? How do you sort of find your thing? Or how would you tell your students to find their thing and to develop it?
So I take this long range view, right? So I look at the side hustle really as the catalyst, as the gateway to creating the life that you want. Because here in America, you're not going to create wealth, right? From working at a
structure,
right. Right. And so part of my doctoral research is really looking at the racial wealth gap in the US and naturally the implications of that globally. And what I found in the research is these entrepreneurial dynasties, your Rothschilds, your Rockefellers and everything like that. So from that perspective, these families, a business or a family doesn't reach dynastic status until the wealth that, you and I as first generation Black wealth creators, until that wealth is structured and packaged and taught, for lack of a better term, and it's controlled within our individual families for at least 3 generations. So I'm in the classroom and, my students are like, oh, Miss White, I'm just here for the degree. I'm just here for 16 weeks. And I'm really trying to get them to think through long range, you're talented at this. You can make a life for yourself if we harness this. How would you want your life to look 20 years from now? And how do we use this side hustle, this talent, this passion to create that life, 20 years from now? So that's the view, like that's the perspective that I bring into like my coaching and my teaching and everything. But the fundamentals of it, like I've kind of boiled it down over the past 11 years to like a 7-step process.
Yeah.
And so that really starts with the foundation of who you are as an entrepreneur, who you are as a first generation Black wealth creator, and these different facets of your identity. Because if you're going to do this, then who you are is going to show up in your brand. And then that brand promise, like that's what people are paying you for, because you said, like,
now you have to
all over your website that you can solve this problem for me. So you're making a promise to me as a consumer. And so if you aren't really in touch with who you are, how you're showing up, how you want to be received, then your messages get so mixed up. And that's really what compromises the sustainability of an idea of a side hustle, because you're just so disconnected or you're so distracted by everything else that's going on that you aren't in tune with how you want to show up.
Yeah. One interesting factor that I've noticed nowadays when having a conversation regarding building generational wealth is that everyone's up for having the conversation. Everyone likes the idea of building generational wealth. But I also find one of the struggles, in particular with our generation, is delayed gratification, because and that's in relations to like social media, is relations to how our various industries, whether it be music, movies, and the glamour industry, everything is now. And when you look at history, because I love history and I love like evolutionary biology and psychology and all that stuff. When you look at history, it takes a lot to get to a particular point. So for instance, us two being here, if you look at the brutality of history, there's a lot of blood, there's a lot of bloodshed, there's a lot of death, there's a lot of wars, there's a lot of like sacrifices for us to just be us two now sitting here talking to each other over here. And in particular, when you look at the Black race, we know all the other additionals that we've been through, slavery, oppression, it's a lot. So whenever I speak to people in regards to like generational, I was like, look at it this way. You're actually building something that you might not potentially benefit from. And that's the God's honest truth about it. And that's something that is, as harsh as it sounds, you're going to have to come to terms with it, that if you really believe in building a generational wealth, you have to look at your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids. Don't look at yourself sitting in a Bentley right now. That might happen and your journey might be exponential, but there's a chance that there's going to be a lot of sacrifice and a lot of suffering. Because even when I look at something simple as my parents, when they came over to Europe, they were doing cleaning jobs before they managed to get the degrees to start working in hospitals and doing nursing and various other jobs and becoming self-employed and becoming property owners. Those are sacrifices that enable me to potentially then live in a better area or go to a better school and save for my siblings and save potentially for my kids. So delayed gratification is a very difficult subject when being brutally honest about. And I wanted to know your perception of it and how you go about like explaining that to your students.
Yeah, it's you're absolutely right. We live in this microwave society. And could you imagine being a Generation Z student and someone talking to you about a 40-year plan? Like what?
I want to be 20 in a mansion. I remember being in school, me and my best friend, we always used to talk about this. We were like, oh, we still laugh at each other about this because we just hit our 30s. But when we were in secondary school, we're like, oh, when we hit 25, like I'm going to get a mansion next to your house. And then we're going to have our kids and take them to like football practice every Saturday and, Bentleys and stuff like that. Then we hit 30, we're like, well, okay, fair enough. We're doing good. It's like, I'm just about buying my first house and looking at my second one now, and it's like, oh, but I still haven't reached the mansion yet, no, bro. Like 25 was about 5-6 years ago, bro. But nonetheless, we made progress. Do you know what I mean? And good progress at that. Yeah.
Right. I think one of the things that really struck home earlier this semester, not this semester, maybe in the spring semester, we're on semesters as opposed to quarters or trimesters. But I was just getting into the data about the racial wealth gap, and there is I want to say it may not be the Institute of Policy Studies. I have to send you the source.
I'll definitely
But
read
there
that.
is there's research that shows that it will take Black households in the United States 242 years. Like if we continue on the same spending pattern and gaps in income and equality, it will take Black households in the United States 242 years to have the same level of wealth that the average white household had in 2013.
Wow. And by that time, there'll be years ahead.
Exactly. And it was that number that really like it. Okay, if we're talking about a 242 year gap, then I think me saying 3 generations was a little bit easier for them to digest. But I had to paint like this really like drastic, empirically sound, right? Like the data is there, but I had to paint that picture for them to really get them out of the way they make their decision is from semester to semester. It's like, if I can start off strong and finish with a passing grade, I'm good. So I really had to put it in perspective that way. And that's when, because it's not until I can get a client or student to really think about the long-term impact when we get into like, you got to raise your prices. Otherwise, I get pushback and resistance because you aren't going to build anybody's dynasty if you're underpaying yourself.
Yeah, most definitely. Definitely. And one of the things that you mentioned there was that it was due to our current spending. So if it was to continue this current wave of spending, it's going to take us near enough forever to reach where we want to reach. But how do we change that? Because everyone understands the power of the black dollar or the black pound, for instance, and we understand where it goes and some of the non-beneficial places that it goes in terms of like our expenditure. It's ridiculous. A lot of it goes towards like luxuries. A lot of it goes towards like takeaway stores that not necessarily belong to the community. How do we continuously keep like hammering that in and getting some action out of the stats that are clearly available to us?
Yeah. So I was watching one of your past podcasts where you were talking about family and getting into like collectivism and going back to the village mentality. One thing that, and I've just been turning this over and over for years, even before I started my research on the racial wealth gap and entrepreneurial dynasties, like the percentage of affluent African Americans is not enough. Like there are not enough African Americans in the US that make money, right? That can have an impact where the masses are. Like we literally have to go into the under-resourced communities and we have to talk to those kids. We have to talk to those parents. We have to get teachers, right, that are from those communities, because the teachers that teach in these underprivileged areas, under-resourced areas, they're there because they can get like some of their student loans and stuff can be. So they love the kids, like they love teaching, but that's not to say that you're committed to this community. Like we need you committed to these streets, right? In this neighborhood, in this block, and that's what it's going to take. It's going to take like a real grassroots effort to go into those community, into the projects, right? And the other part of that is it's going to be hard to do because who the fuck are you rolling up in here
telling me, yeah.
So it's going to take, bravery on the side of those of us who are willing to go back to like the neighborhoods that our parents grew up in. But it's also going to take, a lot of trust from the people in those communities to say, I really just want us all to do better. And I know like that's going to be a struggle. Like I grew up in Miami, like I said, very sheltered, right? But just around the corner from where I live, gunshots all the time. Like they don't want to hear me or see me coming in through there talking about let's not spend money on a PS5.
They got other issues at hand. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's gonna take people like like TI who can really talk to communities that are like in pain, like they're hurting. And so, hurt people, right? So to really be able to hear somebody talking about what your future could look like if you made just one decision differently, it's just going to take a lot of work to be able to rebuild those bridges.
Yeah, most definitely. It's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of pain as well. Because I mean, the frustrating thing is that when people are kind of stuck in a rut, it continues, and everything you do is a generational issue. So, for instance, you're those that are like on the other side of the neighborhood where there's gunshots and stuff, it's very difficult to talk to them about generational wealth because they have to survive the day.
Exactly.
And to change someone's mindset when they're in a rut is very difficult. Like I remember having a friend who was in like dire financial situation, and whenever I attempted to preach to that person in regards to like business and stuff, he's like, yo, I'm trying to pay my phone bill next month. I'm trying to get this £90 to pay T-Mobile when they call me next month. I don't have time to be thinking about A, B, and C. But sometimes it's like drilling that through to them and saying, look, okay, maybe you have to struggle this month to deal with this, but come along to here is going to be in the long run. And then you don't have to worry about the following month and the following month and the following month's issues because you have to make that sacrifice. But it's very difficult because sometimes people are put in a position where, or they're in an environment that they just can't work their way out of. And that's the difficult part. But one interesting thing that I wanted to ask in regards to like the generational, the wealth gap between African Americans and what is it? Just white Americans, or is it all other Americans in general? Is there major gap?
So I think white American households make somewhere around 24 times as much as Black households on average. And then 17 times as much as Hispanic and Latinx households. Yeah,
because I mean, it's been something of like extreme interest to me for the last couple of months, especially since I've watched a couple of documentaries in regards to like redlining and all the other various issues that's gone on during the civil rights movements in the last couple of years. And you realize that it's not really that long ago.
Right.
Like, I mean, when I used to hear about the wealth gap in the States, I thought this was like hundreds of years ago, but then you realize 60s and 70s was just around the corner. Like my parents were born during the time when all of these issues were going on. So it's a fight that just if you look at the scale of history, it's very recent. It's very, very recent. So it is a fight that's going to be very hard fought and very long. But I think that eventually with these type of discussions and with people's eyes being opening to what the issues are and what the main underlying issues are, that we are kind of like opening up to going in the right direction, which is fantastic. One thing I wanted to ask you is, tell me a bit about the Audacity of Privilege, which was your speech, the TED Talk, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What's the? Can you just round off? What's the main concept and idea behind the?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So I was in a faculty meeting last year, and we were debating about textbooks. And one of my colleagues wanted to keep the same textbook we had been using, but there was a cheaper option that was available. And so my colleague said, well, if you can't afford the textbook, you shouldn't register for my class.
Oh, wow.
And I, like, even thinking about it now, I just get furious because how long ago were you a college student that you've forgotten that is not as easy as let me call mom and dad, or let me just pull money out the bank for this $200 textbook for one class. And, students are registering for 5 or 6 classes. And it was just like the audacity that you have to use the privilege that you've gained through your PhD. You're a tenured professor and you basically can't be touched, but the audacity, you're here to serve these students. And I was so furious, right? And that version of my TED Talk isn't the first version that I wrote, but my friend was like,
it down a bit.
Yeah.
I kind of realized that.
Yeah, like, can you see him like still emotional about it? But so I have the privilege of really being connected to my students from a heart-to-heart perspective. So I talk with my students about, what's going on that you didn't perform as well on this assignment. And so when you talk with them, they're going through financial hardships. There's so many students that are like homeless, like they're couch surfing. They have food insecurities. They literally don't know when or where their next meal is going to come from. And if you don't have the capacity and the compassion to understand that at a human level, you won't understand why they aren't doing well in your class. And if the students don't perform well in class, then from an evaluation perspective as a professor, it has all of these political repercussions. But I was like, there is no way that you're going to assess how well I do as a professor because my student is food insecure. Like, I'm more concerned about making sure that they get healthy, nutritious meals, because otherwise it's a waste of their time and money to try to come to this class and they're just going to fail. Yeah. And it was that I really wanted people to look at. While you may not have been born with a silver spoon, or maybe you don't have a trust fund, but you do have privilege. The fact that someone talked to you about going to college is a privilege that other people don't have. I have like this personal library, and that's a privilege, right? So for my daughter, who's 6 years old, she has a library, and they're all like picture books. But that's a privilege that some of her like classmates who are just learning to read, and she's writing a one-page book report every day, like even on Christmas break.
Work don't stop.
Yeah. And so it was, I really wanted to challenge people's perspective or understanding of what privilege is and how it can look. But going beyond that, what can you do with your privilege to create opportunities for other people, and specifically just in that context of first generation college students?
Most definitely, yeah. I'm of the belief that everyone has a privilege, and it's just learning how to harness it and use it properly to your advantage. So this one is one that I think about all the time, is how do we build a dynasty? So like the Black diaspora, the African Americans, like how do we go about building a dynasty? What's the steps that you think we should take?
So just to kind of recap and make sure that we understand that dynastic wealth is different from generational wealth. It's different from building a legacy and building an empire, because dynasties actually show up in empirical literature. So it's peer reviewed, right? Which means that if we look at all of the constructs or the component parts of what a dynasty is, if we apply these things, it can be replicated to get the same or similar results. So a family reaches dynastic status when the first generation wealth creator either has passed down the business. So in the case of the Walton family here in the States, just Walmart, or passed down the wealth, like the Rockefeller family. Like that family hasn't had a business since 1911.
Yeah, but they're on there. Yeah.
Right. But the way that they not only structure like the legal side of it with the trusts and all of that, most dynastic families actually infuse these other forms of capital. There are 4 forms of capital. And we know we really only talk about financial capital, and that's quantitative. But it's these qualitative forms of capital that really get the family in sync with each other about what is this wealth for. What are the money that we're creating, the wealth that we're creating, what is it for? And that's a form of spiritual capital. So spiritual capital isn't like based in religion. It's really saying that there's something bigger than me when it comes to this family, when it comes to this wealth. So even within my own identity as mom this or, LaTanya that, I know that I'm not going to make a decision that's going to compromise the vision that we as a family have established and that we perpetuate. So there's one bookworm, right? The title is Complete Family Wealth.
Complete family wealth, yeah.
Yeah, so I have a post of it on my Instagram.
Oh, okay.
But in that book, they talk about, like, they don't in the States, we have family reunions. So your family's all over the country.
Oh, yeah, I love watching those on TV. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, but wealthy families don't have those. Dynastic families have family retreats.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like a business meeting, right? We're reviewing the mission, like the executive summary of the family. What is the mission of our family? What's the vision for this wealth? And they'll get all of the generations in in one space. And typically the oldest person of like the youngest generation, so, maybe 9, 10 or whatever, will read through the family mission statement. So we're not waiting until you're 30 years old to inform you about what this wealth is for. Like, they are infused through it. So that's the spiritual capital. Another form of capital, qualitative capital for dynastic wealth building, is human capital. And that's acknowledging that everyone has like some form of valuable knowledge or experience that we can use to build businesses, create wealth, and control wealth. So generational wealth really kind of looks at, like, from me down, like my lineage down. But dynastic wealth it has a different directionality. Yeah. So it's me and my daughter, but it's me and my mom and my grandmother. It's me and my siblings and my cousins. So it's not just, the wealth creator down, it's in all directions. And that's human capital. That's really talking with everyone about what's their skill set, what's your knowledge, what's your expertise, and how do we infuse that and incorporate that into this vision for wealth that we've already established as a family.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. I'm like, we got work to do.
we got a lot of work to do. I mean, I felt the weight of like my ancestors on my shoulder right now after that. But one thing I realized about everything you said is that the structure of like building that dynasty is very purposeful. It seems very, very purposeful, and the whole structure, the whole setup. So, for instance, I was born in Ghana, and in Ghana, there's in the tribe that I'm from, they love this idea of a will. We call it Japadia, and when I look at it, I'm always laughing at whenever my mom talks about it, whenever my siblings or family members, elders talk about it, I'm always laughing at the idea of it, because in order to get this will, you need to wait for a particular person to die.
Yeah.
And it's like, and the thing is, it's never talked about. So you never know what you're going to be left with. You never know what's in this will or this treasure, as it will be better interpreted, that this person's going to leave you with. So you might wait, I don't know, till the person turns 90 or whatever, they pass away, and then find out that you got about 300 cloths or whatever. Or you might have a land somewhere which is now like being disputed by 500 other relatives. And I find it ridiculous because, and people don't understand why I'm always like poking fun at them, especially family members, when they talk about this particular will stuff. And because I'm saying it's a waste of time, us having to wait till then to receive it. Because by that time, it might not, my knowledge base might not be able to help us develop it into anything else. If we truly have something there valuable, let's work on it together. Let's say I have this bit of land here in this town, I have this bit of land here, and if we manage it well, we would all be fantastically well off. So my great grandfather, he had a massive pineapple plantation in Kumasi many years ago, and apparently this guy had so much money, it was in like truckloads. Like he had to bring truckloads into the village for people to count his money. But I've never seen his money. This money disappeared. So, and he kept it to himself, never spoke to anyone in his family about it. The only time they saw it was when he was coming around, and everyone knew that he owned this wonderful plantation and these wonderful farms and bits of land. So what happened was, when he passed away, no one knew about it apart from one of his brothers who had no business knowledge whatsoever. Obviously the IQ hadn't passed down to him as part of the generational thing, and he squandered the money and completely decimated the business. No word of a lie. And now the land that the farms were based on are worth, like, I don't know, probably like tens, if not hundreds of million. Had it still been in our family lineage, and that would have been something that would have been passed on, and we could have harnessed, and would have been continued. So that's why when you were talking about that, having those purposeful retreats and actively discussing them and talking to the younger generation about it and blending the family into the business, it's essential, and it's something that we need to look at further instead of holding on and waiting for someone to pass away for us to take on something that's going to be disputed and end up being, I don't know, completely useless at the time.
Yeah. Wow. And there's so many stories like that, especially in families, people of the diaspora, like so many stories like that. And, global economies have been built through literally the blood, sweat, and tears of our ancestors. And we have so much work to do to reclaim it and to reestablish it. So, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about it and to mention it. Like, I get really, really emotional.
Yeah, like
it. But yeah, that's interesting. But the privilege of it is we have the opportunity to change the narrative.
Yeah.
And that's really like the call to action. That's the challenge that I hope that our generation rises up to, so that 400 years from now, there's an entirely different story that's being told about the diaspora.
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely a big admirer of that, and definitely I'm a true believer of it. And that's why I do a lot of what I do, and that's why I speak to a lot of people I speak to, because not only am I learning along the way from people like yourself and all the other various guests I've had on, but I'm able to share that learning experience with my audience, who then, the way I see it is like, whenever I'm making a podcast, I was having this conversation, I was like, even if someone picks out one line from because my podcast can go from anything from 30 minutes to 3 hours. So I'm like, even if someone can pick up one line that then infuses or sparks a plug in them to take action, that to me is essential. Because even having this conversation with you now, I feel more motivated than I did when I woke up. I'm like, oh wow, we do actually have a lot of work to do. We have a lot to consider. And every time I have those conversations, it reaffirms that and re-sparks the engine. And that's why it's important for people like yourself to continuously spread the word that you're doing. Because I checked out your socials and you're constantly putting out like extremely valuable information. And I think your website as well and everything else has like great content in it that can spark change and help people like move on to the next step. Can you tell my audience a bit about some of the work that you're doing currently? Like, so some of the stuff that's on your socials and your website and so forth.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. So I have where I am now is really, really focusing on building Black dynasties. But of course, that's 3 generations from now. So what I want to make sure to, as it relates to going back to our earlier conversation about the microwave society, right, is really empowering Black entrepreneurs to take the first step. A lot of times we have this negative self-talk, and it's like all clouded in doubt and fear and insecurity. So I really coach through this process of becoming fearless. And that's like the title of the process. So it's a proprietary process that really contextualizes the lived experience of Black and African American entrepreneurs who have come from families that might not be talking about entrepreneurship. You know, you're probably the first entrepreneur in your family, and they probably look at you crazy, right? You might feel isolated. You don't have the community that some of our counterparts in other races have. So I really focus on becoming fearless for this ultimate goal of building dynastic wealth. And becoming fearless starts with that foundation, right? That kind of identity claiming. Like, we have to claim our identities. A lot of times we just, and this was my own story, right? By the time I got to college, I was who people told me I was, right?
Yeah, that's an issue.
They told me these things about myself. And I was into my master's program before I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah. I'm not the title that you bestowed upon me. Yeah.
Exactly. So the sooner I can help people like claim their identity, like, who are you at your core? Like, what are the parts of your soul that you bring with you that you can't code switch, right? And so that's a real part of this entrepreneurial process. So really starting with the identity claiming, and then getting into the brand storytelling, and how do you tell the story of your business? How do you help people know that these are the problems you solve? And then we get into, okay, the blue ocean strategy. What are you up against, and where's your gap in the marketplace? Where's the niche that you need to fill? But I think it's at this point of retraining, which is really where like the light bulb goes off. And this is where we start talking about strategic pricing. And, what is your personal income goal? And how do we build that into how you price your products and services? So it's those processes. So once we get to reestablishing like strategic pricing and making sure that you aren't going to burn out from trying to build this business, I strongly advocate, like what you're doing through your podcast. I consider that leveraging other people's expertise, right? Because as much of a bookworm as you are, like, it doesn't make sense for you to go back and read the books that I've read and the research articles that I've been reading over 3 years when we could have conversations like
and share all of that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Most definitely.
Exactly. So being able to leverage, your expertise and your knowledge and really learn from you and draw off your passion is going to propel entrepreneurs into this place where I can do this faster, I can get here quicker, and I can be more efficient in the process. And so the next step is building like those efficient systems and, documenting how your business works, because you should not be the only person doing everything.
Yeah, that's the hard part. That's I think that's some part that people struggle to let go, because everyone sees their business as a baby, but a business should be a structure that has different arms in it. So it's like at the moment I do everything myself, but I'm trying to find ways of like spreading out the load, because it's near enough impossible having to do everything on your own, and it's not feasible either for your mental or your physical state. Would you say there's a formula or mindset to success that people should focus on developing? Like, what are the parts that people should focus on developing?
I think that's a great question. I really the 7 habits of highly effective people.
Highly effective people. A while back.
So one of those habits is success leaves clues. And that says that we don't have to figure it out from scratch by ourselves.
Someone's done it.
But you do need to be in the right rooms, right? You need to be in the room where it happens. So you need to be in the right rooms, and you need to have connections with the right people. And that's how we connected, right? Because I was in a room on Clubhouse, and I don't know if you were on stage or whatever, but I know I like clicked your bio and checked out the podcast, and I was like, this is so dope. And so Yeah, thank you. And so now it's like you have created for me literally an international audience for me to talk about dynastic wealth building. Now, if that's not like the pathway to success, so really success leaves clues, meaning find the people who have been where you are and are on their way to where you want to be and add value to them. I think a lot of people, especially the younger generation, at least some of my students, they're like, "Oh, Miss White, will you be my mentor?" And I'm like, "What do you bring to the table?" Because
that's true.
Like any other relationship, it's give and take.
Yeah, I remember when me and my friend first found our mentor, people were like, "Oh, how do you find?" I'm like, "Well, we're in his house every weekend, cold calling property owners. It's like we're doing something in exchange for it. We're actually putting in the work. You don't just knock in someone's door and be like, "Oh yeah, can you show me how you made your money?" It's like they've got their lives to live. So what are you really offering them? We're really there making calls and, "Hi, is your property available for sale?" Or like, I mean, because he's a property guy, so you're giving something back. And obviously I was giving my interpersonal skills, my ability to speak to various people and demographics over the phone and be able to engage them and keep them on there long enough to get a yes or no or have the phone cut off for me. But I'm able to do that. That's one of my skills that I was leveraging. So definitely people always have to consider what they have to bring to the table. Don't just always assume that, because people are always under the assumption that, oh, they don't want to mess with me, they don't want to holler at me. But at the same time, people are busy, people got stuff going on, and you have to bring something to them in order for get their attention in the first place. So one of the interesting things I've come across when speaking to many business personnel and successful people is they're very conscientious. So they're people that they start something and they want to do it very well and they want to see it through. Like that's one of the things that I've really thoroughly noticed about them. They're like, whenever I listen to their stories, whether it be on the podcast or off the podcast, when we're speaking other days after, once we develop a friendship or relationship, or whatever, is that they're very, very, very conscientious. They know what they're doing. And they'll see every job through. Like nothing ever gets left lagging, or nothing is ever half-hearted. If they believe in something and they started it, they'll make sure that they finish it. And that's one of the key things I always tell people. I'm like, look, if you start something and you believe in it, finish it. Don't just give up next week thinking, I didn't make $1 million this week, you know. It's like you're getting blindsided by all these ads that you're seeing on YouTube and on Instagram about a 17-year-old kid made $1 million by applying to or clicking on this button. Yeah, you potentially can make $1 million from this ad, but it requires a lot more work than the 30-second ad that you just viewed, because that 30-second ad will tell you clicked on 2 buttons and made $1 million. No, it just doesn't work that way all the time. And there are rare occasions where it happens, because I know of someone who just by luck they joined something and one thing led to another, and all of a sudden, boom. But I only know one person that's happened to. Whilst these ads will tell you it happens to every single person that clicks on these. So the work is required, and that's very, very important. But I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, and we're definitely going to catch up again. We're definitely going to catch up again and continue our conversation in regards to like the Dynasty. So what I always like to tell my guests is that the first episode is just me getting to know them, but sometimes it leads into really, really valuable conversations like the ones I think we've had here today. And then obviously next time we engage, we'll be like tackling specific topics and specific ideas that people come back to me on, because I get a lot of emails. I realize that my guests tend to be of the older range, so they will thoroughly send me real deep emails asking various questions. I'm like, look, I'll get the guest on again, and then we're going to delve into it a bit deeper. I'm going to do my side of the research, because I don't just like speaking just for the sake of speaking. I like speaking from a place of like, even if I'm going to be able to understand the questions that I'm going to ask my guest, or at least delve a bit deeper and make a bit more like an informed argument in relations to the various topics. That's what I like to do, because I think there's a lot of people just speaking nowadays, because the platforms are there, they're easily accessible, and you can just speak whatever it is that you want to. You can just say whatever the hell you want to say, and it is what it is, but I think there's too many distractions, and I'm trying to veer away from that as much as people are trying to push me into distractions, because I get a lot of calls. People are, oh, you know what, I like your communication, I like this and that, do you want to do this? And it's very like clickbaity stuff, and I'm like, I'm going to stick to my morals. I'm going to stick to my mission and my aim of what I'm doing this, because I know at the end of the day, that's what's going to pay off. So I don't want to veer off into another end. But what else you got planned for the rest of your day?
Well, for the rest of the day, I actually am doing some business coaching sessions. So I have been going live on Instagram recently, 7 p.m. Eastern. But even though I've been in the classroom for 11 years, I was struggling to really be visible. And that's just like from workplace burnout and like workplace trauma, right? So I have a coach that was like, there's no way you're going to help build Black dynasties if no one knows you exist. So that's something that I've been doing, is just like you can hop on my calendar and I'll coach you through whatever challenges that you're facing in your business. So I have a couple of those today.
I think visibility is very important, especially from people of the community. Like, I mean, if you got the knowledge to share, we have to start making ourselves more visible. People are like, the area saturated. I don't think it's saturated enough with good ideas and good conversations. So people are always under the fear that, oh my gosh, there's too much out. No, there's not. Like, it needs to be more. The rightful things need to be said more and need to be more amplified, and more people need to jump on and share their knowledge. Because if you're doing in a classroom, yes, fair enough, you might be impacting the 10, 20, 30.
Exactly.
It's a small circle, but online, hundreds, thousands, and that's the great purpose of social media medium. As much as it does harm and damage, it also does fantastic stuff based on how you decide to use it and how you decide to implement yourself within the system. So it's fantastic, man. Get yourself out there, do more of this, and I'm happy to connect with you today. We're definitely going to connect again.